In this video, I'm going to talk to you about breakups. So this is basically a story time video because I'll be sharing stories from my patrons, and I will also be sharing my own story, what's happening to me right now, at the end of this video. And it's going to be a conversation that we are not only having with one another, but we're also having this conversation with the tarot. And I'm doing this to show you a different way of communicating with the tarot. You don't always need to do a tarot reading. Sometimes you can just be like, I want to tell you my story and I'm wondering what you think. Kind of like as if you were talking to an old friend, an older relative perhaps, someone who has more wisdom than you. You can talk to the tarot that way as well. So you're not necessarily asking for advice. You might be getting some advice or guidance, but it's mostly about sharing your story. And in this video, I'll be demonstrating how you can do that. And I'm also going to be sipping some tea. It's morning here, and I woke up kind of feeling cold a little bit. So I hope that this tea helps. So let me pull up the first story. The first story comes from R. And it's a really heartbreaking story. Let me read it to you. I was with my fiancé from age 19 to 21. In fact, we broke up a month after I turned 21. We were engaged when I turned 20. All of this is happening when they are really, really young. Let me just say that. So, from 20 to 21, he broke the engagement and tried to get engaged again 3 times. After the second time, I warned him that if he did it again, I couldn't stay with him. And of course, he did it again. Between the second and third time he did it, I lost over 40 pounds in a month. I could not and would not allow myself to continue. After we broke up, he seemed excited. He ran around like he didn't have a care in the world. 2 months after my 21st birthday, I went into the hospital for depression. The breakup at least helped me get on some medication to keep me level, but I haven't been engaged ever since. I will turn 35 in July. So this is a story that happened a long time ago, a breakup that has sort of this ripple effect throughout her life. But she's still able to see a silver lining here. She's saying that at least she was able to receive some medication to help her with her depression that might have been there even before all of this happened, or it might have been triggered by the events. And so, by the way, the point of sharing these stories with all of you, with the help of my kind supporters, patrons, the point of this is to see patterns, because there's very often similar elements of breakups that are present in many breakups. And so if you're going through something like this, something similar to ours story, then you know you're not alone, and the tarot is speaking to you as well. Okay. And I find it really, really heartbreaking when she says that she lost 40 pounds. So it seems like her health was pretty much on the line with this breakup. So let's see what the tarot would like to say to that. Okay. We have the Nine of Cups. And that's a really positive card. It's telling you, R, that this breakup was necessary in order to find your independence. And since you're writing that you haven't been engaged ever since, maybe that's not a problem. Maybe the whole point of this story was to find yourself, to prove to yourself that you're strong enough on your own, and that you can manage, that you don't really need anybody else to complete you. And it's a reinforcement, this Nine of Pentacles, that the current state of your mind and the current state of your being is a productive one. So you are on the right path. You're healing from this, even if it's a slow process. The next story comes from Tiffany. My biggest breakup was with my high school sweetheart. We were together for 2 years, from our senior year of high school into college. After 2 years, he finally told me that he was not interested in women and had been seeing other guys behind my back. I was heartbroken and upset that I had been used, but I felt so bad for him that he had to hide behind our relationship instead of being with who he really wanted to be with. So Tiffany's story is especially complicated because we have someone here who's not even attracted to the opposite sex, and they are carrying this huge secret, and instead of being upfront about it, they are, like Tiffany said, they are hiding behind the relationship. So naturally she felt used, and her trust was severely violated. And even though it's a story from high school and I guess the first year of college, it still left a mark. It's still a significant experience to Tiffany. So I guess what we can take away from that is, even if something happened a long time ago, and people say that time heals all wounds, that might be true, but you're not forgetting anything. When something happens to you that deeply affects you, you will carry that with you. The question is only whether you let it take control of your life, whether you allow it to suck the joy out of your life, whether you allow it to control your decisions and your mood. So, we're talking to the tarot now. We're asking the tarot about Tiffany's story. And I think that's a story that's relatively rare, but it has happened. It happens to people even nowadays. Even with the taboo of same-sex relationships being lifted to a certain extent, even then, these things can happen. So we have the Eight of Swords, and that's the card of interference. So it's interesting that I have just been talking about the memories and whether they are controlling us, whether they are an obstacle, an interference in our lives. And the Eight of Swords is indicating to me that, Tiffany, you need to be really careful, because this story, even though, like I said, it happened a long time ago, even then this story is still lingering in your mind. It still has an effect. And the main impact of this memory on your life is that it's more difficult for you to really fully trust people, because you have been duped before. And the Eight of Swords represents someone who is struggling to trust not only others but also their own capabilities. So the tarot is gently pointing out to you to take good care of yourself and to realize that this narrative, this storyline is still running deep within your mind. So try to catch it in action when it's activated, when you're triggered, so to say. Try to catch it and stop it, because you are no longer in that position. Your life is different now. The next story comes from someone called Pisces. This is obviously not their real name. I just wanted to give them a moniker because I didn't receive permission to use their real name. So Pisces writes, "There's only one breakup, my ex-fiancé Joe, that really affected me and is worth sharing. I've had a few other relationships, but either they weren't as serious or we hadn't been cohabitating, etc. When Joe and I broke up I literally felt like I had lost a piece of myself. Didn't even know who I was anymore. I wandered around aimlessly like a lost soul. So tired that I felt like I was about to drop. Yet I had insomnia and couldn't sleep. At first, I tried to fill the void by searching for someone else to date, but I realized very quickly that that's the worst thing I could do. My relationship with Joe was still fresh in my mind, and I couldn't help but compare every guy to him. The what ifs that cycled through my head, feelings of inadequacy, depression, mingled with anger, resentment. I wasted 5 years of my life, my prime years, and have nothing to show for it, etc. The hardest part was that he had become my best friend. I missed talking to him every day about everything, and since we moved a lot, I had become isolated from my family. Didn't really have any friends, at least not locally. My friends were 2,000 miles away or more, and finally we had adopted a dog together. We basically created our own little family. When it was over, it felt like my world split in two. Constant self-deprecating thoughts racing through my head. Who's gonna want me now? I'm so old. How am I gonna move back home? Who gets the dog? So basically this story from Pisces is really relatable, I think, to a lot of us, because she's giving us a detailed report of her feelings throughout the process, and I think it's really accurate for a lot of us to feel a mixture of resentment and hatred and anger and also aimlessness and sadness. It's a really intense time whenever there's a breakup happening, and it's understandable that we lose ourselves to an extent, because the relationship had defined us before we broke up. And especially in codependent relationships, where, like in the case of Pisces, you are far away from family and friends, and you're basically absolutely dependent on your partner. And when something happens, when something changes, then that can be really rough and hard to deal with. Okay, so the card for Pisces is the Eight of Cups, and that could be one of the classic breakup cards. And it's interesting that with the first story we had Pentacles, so that was more focused on the earth element, the element of health, the element of structure, of material stability. In the first story, the story of R, we had someone who became hospitalized because they just totally lost their touch with their core. They became ungrounded, so to say. And in the second story, in Tiffany's story, we learned about the importance of perspective and managing our mental processes, our memories, and how they affect us. And with the story of Pisces, which was filled with detailed descriptions of how she felt and what she went through on an emotional level, we have cups. And cups represent the astrological element of water, so feelings, emotions. And the Eight of Cups in this deck represents stagnant water, so stale water rather. So there's a feeling of being stuck with the Eight of Cups, and the importance to move on, even if it's difficult. The Eight of Cups, especially in this deck, can represent sticky situations that are hard to move away from. But these are always situations that require us to gather our strength and change things around, because there's a level of toxicity here that is really damaging and unhealthy, and is really not helpful in any way. And the key to understanding what the Eight of Cups would like to tell us and tell you, dear Pisces, is understanding that it represents the urge and the necessity to search for new meaning. Everything in life, at least in my opinion, is valuable or worthless, depending on how meaningful it is to us. And meaning is subjective to an extent. So the Eight of Cups asks you to search for your own truth, your own meaning, a new meaning of what it means to be you, and perhaps what it means to be in a relationship. Even though the breakup happened a considerable amount of time ago, I am not sure if you had included it in your email, but I think it's not that fresh. The memory is not that fresh. You had some time to process it, and the tarot is basically asking you to move on and reevaluate what a relationship should really be like. Find a new meaning for your relationships. The last patron story comes from RD, and he's very young. He's 19 years old, and he has recently had, I believe, probably his first breakup, or his first most meaningful breakup, or one of his first breakups anyway. And so here goes the story. Once there was this girl who I met through my stepbrother. She was married, but going through a rough time, and she had told me she wanted a divorce with her husband because he was always getting angry at her, and when she would get sad, whenever he was angry, he would get even more angry and start yelling and just in general act like a terrible person. I got to experience this firsthand a couple of times. She would call me a lot, and all of a sudden, while we were in the middle of talking, her husband would come out of nowhere and yell at her over some little thing, and I got to hear all of it. It made me feel so bad for her, but what I figured I would try to do is be there for her. I wanted to try to make her laugh. I wanted her to be happy. About a month or two passed, and eventually she admitted that she got really close to me and that she started to like me. And after 2 months of spending a lot of time with her, I too started having feelings for her. So we started dating in secret. In hindsight, this was probably pretty terrible for me to be involved with, but I just couldn't help myself. Anytime I was away from her, I felt alone, and anytime I was with her, I felt so happy, something I haven't felt in my entire life. I had never had anything like that with another person before, so I didn't care about the circumstance, I suppose. I just wanted us to be happy together. Well, after a few months went by, her husband stole her phone and read some Skype messages we sent to each other. That was when he gave her a choice. Either they try to work things out, or he leaves. To be fair, I suppose it wasn't too tough a choice for her to make, seeing as she's a stay-at-home wife with no way to support herself, and I don't have money to support us both by myself. Plus, there's no doubt that she does genuinely love him. So that night, she told me we needed to break up and she needed to work things out with him. Since then, has probably been the hardest days of my life. Not a day goes by when I wonder what could have been if he never found out about us. But what I do know is that they are still together and she's happy with him for once. I suppose me being with her for so long made him realize that he took her for granted, and he makes her happy now instead of making her cry. And I took what emotions I was left with and started writing songs, which I share with my friends, and they seem to like them. So, in the end, it still hurts a lot, but I got what I wanted. She finally got to be happy with someone, and that's all I was really hoping for in the first place. So, RD is really, really young, 19 years old, and I'm not sure if he included the age of the other person in this description, but she's really, really young too. She's 22. And I'm not that young anymore, but back then I've made a lot of mistakes myself as well, and I think that's normal. That's part of the learning curve. And what you're saying about being able to turn this into a creative process, I think that speaks volumes of your strength and of your character. So that's pretty amazing. And I'm just wondering if it's really gonna work out for this girl, because being in an abusive relationship, that's really tough, and sometimes it's hard to get away, and it's understandable that she wanted to look for an escape, and you were her escape. But you need to understand that this is not your problem and that you cannot solve it. This is something that she needs to make a decision about. And it seems like she decided to choose what she already knew, the familiar, even if It's far from perfect. I mean, verbal abuse, it's no joke. It really can destroy a person's self-respect and self-esteem. So it's really toxic, but maybe she will realize that too. So let's see what the tarot would like to say about that story and what they would like to say to you. And we have the Death card. And that's pretty interesting because you're really young, and I have the feeling that this is the first time that a breakup has really hit you strong. And the tarot would like to tell you with this Major Arcana card that this is part of life, that everything comes and goes, relationships come and go, and it's like a process of cycles in our lives. We get used to certain situations and we think that they are gonna stay the same way forever, but then the energy of death enters the picture after the cycle has run its course and everything changes again. So there's really nothing permanent in life, and a breakup is always a great chance to reinvent ourselves and to allow our being, our personality, our inner structure, our inner psychological structure to be reborn. Death basically always represents a rebirth situation. There's no death in the tarot without a rebirth. So a cycle, an episode has ended for you, RD, and a new one is coming, and you're being transformed in a painful way. Of course, death is always associated with a feeling of loss and confusion and heartache. But something new is already forming within you, a new self. And that's the deepest layer of meaning with this breakup for you, is that it's a chance for you to reform who you are. And you will experience these changes within yourself. And just observe them. Just observe these changes. Just like you mentioned, the creative inspiration that you got from this breakup. Things like that will be happening left and right. And you will come out as a new person at the end of this process. And finally, I would like to share my own story with you. I have been in a relationship for 2 years now, and I'm living in another country. I'm living in Germany. That's not my home country. I moved here because of my boyfriend. And unfortunately, in April, everything started to change between us. It was kind of like, looking back, I can see that it was a long process, that it didn't happen overnight, and that I just had these rose-colored glasses when I was looking at him, because I was really very much in love with him, and I still am to an extent. So I just, in April, I just realized that he's not who I thought he was. And that really came as a shock. He's an extremely emotionally unavailable person. Someone who doesn't like to talk about his feelings. And he doesn't share a lot. And now he stopped spending any time with me, basically. He's focused on other things. He's not putting any effort or energy into the relationship. And I have done some research on this problem, by the way, and this might be valuable to you as well. What I found in my research is that it comes down to attachment styles. And he has the avoidant attachment style. And these attachment styles, they stem from childhood, how your parents treated you. And he did have a pretty serious traumatic influence in his childhood, so I can see where it comes from. But I can't be his therapist. I have my own life to live, and the worst thing is he doesn't want to change anything. He thinks that it's just perfect the way it is, and so I really can't do anything with that. And so when somebody has this avoidant attachment style, that means that they are really afraid to let someone close to them on an emotional level. And they do all kinds of things to keep their partners at arm's length. So if you're in a relationship like that, if the situation rings familiar to you, then this card is for you as well. It's pretty interesting that I had the image of the Lovers card, the Major Arcana Lovers, in my mind when I was drawing this card. And here we have the Two of Cups. Now, honestly, I'm a little bit confused why this happened. It's so strange. I saw the image of the Lovers card, which is pretty much the big sister of the Two of Cups. And I saw this visual image in my head, and then now we have the Two of Cups. And it kind of just hits me hard because the beginning of our relationship was really romantic, and we had this instant connection. You know, when you meet someone and there's just this knowledge, this certainty that you belong together. So we had that in the beginning. But at the same time, the Two of Cups is a more superficial connection, a temporary connection, and it doesn't go as deep as the Lovers card. And in my experience, the Two of Cups doesn't really speak about the commonalities between two people, and it says nothing about compatibility, about being able to work together, and that's an important part of a well-functioning relationship. It's more about attraction, and that's definitely what the root of this relationship was. And it's also interesting that I have the anxious, preoccupied attachment style, which means that I tend to get really codependent in my relationships, and I tend to need my partner a lot more than he needs me. And it's interesting because the archetypal dance of these two attachment styles, there's this great level of attraction between anxious, preoccupied and avoidant people, even though the relationship, for obvious reasons, is very dysfunctional. But it's kind of like these two attachment styles complete one another on a deep, needy psychological level. So I interpret this card as a recognition that there was a lot of attraction, there was that spark in the beginning, but that's not enough. And in my journey towards building new relationships in the future, I need to really be aware of that, because it causes more heartache when you only follow the energy of this attraction. So attraction basically doesn't equal compatibility. That could be a good interpretation of this card. Anyway, so like I said, I'm living in Germany now. I'm learning the language, and I'm looking for a new job, and I'm trying to become more independent to get out of this codependent situation and to be able to start anew. But it's really heartbreaking, because I still love him, and I can imagine that he still loves me too, but he's not showing it in any way. So the Two of Cups is not enough. It's not the mature love that we should be looking for. Thank you for watching this video. I hope that you found something interesting in it. Perhaps even some answers to your questions. And I hope to see you in my next video. Bye bye.